Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. There's lots to cover today, but first I just want to welcome everyone to the webinar and thank you all for joining us today and taking the time to be here. My name is Kayla Ripple and I'm a Principal Associate with the Lenfest Ocean Program. I'm also joined today by my colleagues Emily Knight and Jason Landrum, who work with me at Lenfest as well. You may see some chats from them in the chat box during the webinar. And in fact, Emily will be dropping links to resources we mentioned for this project in the chat box, so keep an eye out there for that. And for those of you who are less familiar with our program, the Lenfest Ocean Program is a grant-making program that funds ocean and coastal research projects to address needs that are facing decision makers and stakeholders. And you can learn more about us and the projects we fund at lenfestocean.org. And while you're there, you can also sign up for our newsletter to receive updates about different projects. And today, we're excited to have joining us several members of a research team that are working to implement ecosystem indicators into small-scale fisheries management in Sala Bay, Indonesia. And Emily will drop a link to their project fact sheet as well. This project stems from a previous working group on ecosystem benchmarks that identified indicators for ecosystem structure and function that can be used with current data to better align fisheries management with ecosystem-based management practices. Emily will share a link to the executive summary in the chat. This work is part of a broader portfolio at Lenfest, where over the past 20 years, we've assembled task forces, research teams, and so many other people to better understand how to operationalize ecosystem-based management in fisheries around the world. Emily's going to drop a link to our blog that sort of describes some of the work and the projects that have come out of this portfolio. We're also hosting 2 more webinars in the coming months from the portfolio, including one on March 27th on informing an ecosystem-based approach for fisheries management in the Caribbean, and one on May 2nd for implementing ecosystem-oriented approaches in Thailand's fisheries, which is very similar to the project here. It's been a tremendous amount of work by all of the research teams, and for us at Lenfest, we're really excited to see the principles put to practice. We hope that by sharing the lessons from these projects, others can use them as examples and the research teams as resources for implementing EBFM in your own region or country. And before we get started, just a few logistical things. To prevent any feedback or echoes, all attendees are muted, but we do want to hear from you. So please feel free to introduce yourself and add your comments or other resources you'd like to share in the chat box during the webinar. And if you have a question for the speakers, you can submit those in the Q&A box. I'll be keeping track of those throughout the webinar, and at the end, I'll read the questions out loud for the team to answer. If we don't get to your question, or if you have follow-up questions after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to us or the research team. We would love to hear from you and connect with you. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded, so we will distribute the link broadly afterwards. So please share this with others. And again, follow up with the research team if you have any questions afterwards. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Beth to get us started.
G'day. So thanks to everyone for coming and joining us today. I'm going to give you a brief rundown on the indicators work that Kayla mentioned before we get into the details for Indonesia, just so people have the concepts in mind. Next slide, please. And next one. So this is a body of work that's grown out. Has grown out of about 8 years of work across a large number of people around the world. It's definitely a joint effort, and it's good to see it come this far, but just acknowledging it's just not me. There's a lot of other people involved. Next slide, please. Primarily, the work's happened in the Eastern Bering Sea, North Central Chile, Indonesia and Australia initially, and now has grown into the Gulf of Thailand and Sala Bay, and it's great to see some of the results of that starting to flow through. But those locations were initially, sorry, my dog is now barking in the background. Initially, it was chosen because they are very different kinds of ecosystems and very different cultures and expectations from their ecosystems. So we're trying to find a way of looking at ecosystem structure and reporting that into fisheries and conservation management that would work regardless of the kind of ecosystem you are dealing with. Next slide, please. This has been really important because a lot of historical fisheries management focuses on assumptions around if the fishery was just the fish and the fishermen. In reality, most fisheries in the world are actually at least mixed with different species being caught by different fleets, or in actuality, the animals eat each other. So it's a really complicated set of connections. And that historical kind of fisheries practice isn't going to work. So we have to find a new way of doing things. So we worked with managers and research scientists and policymakers to find something that would work. Next slide, please. One of the assumptions that people often see is that they've learnt about maximum sustainable yield from a textbook or a course, and they assume that if they go and do that for each individual species in these really species systems, that that's going to work, and somehow that you can take all of those individual maximum sustainable yields at the same time. And the reality is just very different. Indeed, if you fished at by taking the maximum sustainable yield of each species at the same time, you would massively overfish a system, which you can sort of see here. That dotted black line on the left-hand side is the maximum multi-species yield, so the real maximum that you can get out of an ecosystem. And you can see its peak is much lower than if you add the individual dots together on those big linear lines. So we're really trying to find a way to help people stay within the bounds of an ecosystem level of exploitation. Next slide, please. Now, we want to myth bust right from the start. It is possible to do EBFM regardless of what ecosystem that you're in. You don't need to have heaps and heaps of data. You can tailor the indicators that you use to the data available. And I'll touch on a few of the sort of data light ones at the very start. But the bulk of what I'll talk about assumes that you'll have catch composition and some food web information. Now, you can use these indicators with data if you've got it, but you will need data from an unfished reference location or from history. So it's more likely that you're going to rely on ecosystem models for at least part of it. But in theory, you can do all of this just with data. It doesn't have to have a model. And it also links from strategic guidance of management right through to tactical decision making. Okay, next slide, please. So the first concept to get your head around is called hub species. So the reason they're called hubs is because the idea came from the same methods that people use to look at weaknesses in transport networks or distribution networks or the internet. So the idea of a hub being somewhere where a lot of flow goes through, and if you lose that critical bridge or you lose that critical internet server, then the whole thing goes down. So using those exact same methods, running it over a food web where the individual nodes are the species and the edges or the links between them are their feeding or habitat interactions. Next slide, please. So if you do that, you can find that there are some key species that if you take them out of the system, the functioning of the system degrades really quickly. And that's because ecosystems evolve to transmit energy up through them as rapidly as possible and to be robust to a random loss of species through time. But they have these key links that if you lose them, the function, the energy flow just isn't going to work as well, and you get very large scale change in the ecosystem. Some of these species will also be recognised as keystone species, but it is a different concept. It's not a one-to-one mapping. What you often find is that they're forage species or prey species at the bottom that support a lot of the web, or connecting species at the top, really high top level predators that connect across the system. And they're identified based on their feeding connections. There's some mathematics behind that I'll save you, but that's the basic idea, what's holding those systems together. And once you've identified them, you can put additional management precaution around trying to make sure that they're maintained. Next slide, please. Using that exact same information and some advances that people have done around networks, you can also see how resilient that network structure is. And that comes down to the amount of flow that's going through the network, and how diverse that is across different pathways in that food web, and the number of connections in the food web. The more diverse the food web is in terms of the number of connections, the more connections and the more pathways that the energy is flowing through, the more resilient the system is. If you lose connections or you lose that diversity of flow, you become partially resilient. And if it continues to decline in either of those dimensions, you will eventually pass a collapse frontier. And that means that the structure of the system simplifies dramatically. You may well still have an ecosystem there. It may still have some species around, but it won't be as diverse and it won't have as much energy flowing through it. It won't be as productive. Next slide, please. The last idea to get your head around as a component is around distortive pressure. How are you putting pressure on the system? Does it match the kind of pattern of pressure that you would see in an unfished system? So the idea is that without fishing or other human disturbance, there's a pattern of the ecosystem has been ticking along under a pattern of predation indefinitely, or at least for long periods of time, and that pattern of pressure is sustainable. So if you take that pattern, you take the slope, you plot it up as biomass versus production, the slope of that line and the spread around it tells you the pattern of fishing catch that'll be sustainable in a fished system. So if we have the next slide, please. So that profile there. So the green band is the safe spot. That means that pattern of catch, fishing pressure, looking at catch versus production, would match the predation pressure. So you're not putting too much pressure on any one part of the system so that it's in a different pattern to that predation that it was effectively evolved to withstand. Next slide, please. So the slope of that regression in the biomass one comes over to be the slope of that green band, and the width of variation around that predation, the blue dots, relates to the width that your green band ends up. Next slide, please. So once you've got that green band, then you put on how much you actually fish, and you look to see where the individual species fall. Are they sitting inside the green band, in which case you're not putting distortive pressure on them? Are they sitting under the green band, which means that you've got a little bit of scope to increase your fishing pressure on those groups? Or are they sitting above the green band? And that's the orange dots. And that's when you're overfishing a system in the sense of putting too much pressure on one part of the system. You're causing a structural distortion. Now, you'll notice that there's a single black line there, and that's actually the level of fishing pressure that single species fishery science would suggest is a sustainable level. So you can see the lower productivity species will actually still have distortive pressure on them, even if you were complying with single species management. And this is where that disconnect between a multi-species and an ecosystem approach and the well-intentioned single species approach. So this does help you bring the two worlds together. And so you could do single species management and just check it in this way and say, am I complying with that green band or not, even if I didn't do anything else? That would get you closer to EBFM. Next slide, please. And you can track that through time. This is an example from Southeast Australia where some of the species were moving up into that green band and then going beyond it, and then the management measures had to try and bring it back within that green band. Next slide, please. You can think about each of those components separately, or you can actually combine them together. So just as in Australia, we have a warning index around bushfires or floods that bring together all of the exposures and pressures to say, this is a good day, there's not going to be any bushfires, or no, this is a day where bushfires might be at risk. It would be really handy to have that kind of warning system for ecosystems. So that's why we combine these different indicators together to give you that one measure. So it brings together the idea of the hub species and the topology of the system, how resilient that structure is, and whether you're putting distortive pressure on it. Next slide, please. So it has a 10-point rating, which sounds a lot, but in reality, you can just think about the four colours. If you're in the greens, your fairly lightly fished system, you can just keep monitoring. You don't really need to change what you're doing. In fact, you could increase fishing. If you're in the light yellow, then you're in a pretty good fishery state. You would want to keep monitoring, but you don't require any change. Once you start to get into the orange, you don't have to respond immediately, but you're going to have to start reporting in some stronger management and pay attention to what you're doing in the ecosystem. But the ecosystem should rapidly respond, and you should be in a good state again pretty quickly. Whereas if you get into the red, you really need urgent intervention. If you're going to maintain your ecosystem structure and function, it would need to be really large-scale change. Next slide, please. And you can either plot that as a once-off, as we've done for different systems around the world, or you can try and look at it through time. And this is an example actually from Thailand, tracking how it's changed since 1950, both in terms of fish down effects, but also recovery once management has started to be put in place. Next slide, please. So that's pretty much it for me. It's about changing your point of view so that you can deal with the fact that you don't need to be focusing on one species at a time. It's not about trying to replicate historical management for fisheries for thousands of species all at once. It's about leveraging that systematic nature of the way ecosystems work and using that to tell you whether you're really aiming for EBFM or not. Next slide, please. And I think that should be me. So I'll hand over to probably Irfan and the rest of the team. Thanks.
Okay. Hello. Sorry. Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Heidi Retnoningtyas, and together with my colleagues in Rekam Nusantara Foundation, we will be presenting our work in implementing ecosystem-based fisheries management, or EBFM, in Indonesia, with a focus on Saleh Bay as a case study. This project is a collaborative effort between multiple institutions, bringing together scientists, fisheries managers, and policymakers to develop a more comprehensive approach to sustainable fisheries management. And this project is supported by the Land-Fast Ocean Program. And through this partnership, we aim to apply ecosystem-based principles to fisheries management in Indonesia, ensuring that fisheries remain productive while maintaining ecological balance. Next, please. So here's what we'll be covering in the presentation. So I will provide a short background on Indonesia's fisheries and its general characteristic, including the site focus. And then my colleague later on will provide the methods, results, and the research to management alignment. Next slide, please. So, well, some of you might have been familiar with the numbers presented here. So, as Indonesia is the world's largest archipelago, it's made up of more than 17,000 islands, which are connected by the more than 9 million kilometers square of waters, consisting of archipelagic, territorial, and exclusive economic zone. And in 2014, the government of Indonesia established 11 fisheries management areas, aiming to manage fisheries sustainably and effectively in Indonesian waters. Approximately 1.25 million of people are heavily dependent on fisheries, either directly as fishers or through related industries such as processing and marketing. And up to date, more than 800 fishing boats have been registered and more than 8 million tons of fish are produced annually. Next slide, please. So as most of fisheries in Asian waters, including Indonesia, these countries target multiple species simultaneously. Fishers usually do not focus on just one species. They catch a variety of fish, which includes demersal fish, reef fish, pelagic fish, and all of which interact within the ecosystem. A management system that only considers one species at a time fails to account for the interdependencies within the food web, where the removal of one species can affect predators, prey, and competitors. On the other hand, climate change and habitat degradation have increasingly impacted fish populations, and it is important. So it is important to address these environmental drivers, which can leave fisheries vulnerable to sudden declines or unexpected shifts in population dynamics. And recognizing these challenges, there is a pressing need for a more holistic management approach that examines how fishing, food webs, habitat condition, and environmental changes influence fish species. Next click, please. And then EBFM has emerged as a framework that incorporates these interconnected factors, offering a broader perspective on sustainable fisheries management. Next slide, please. So the ecosystem-based to fisheries management examine how fisheries integrate with ecological and human consideration to achieve acceptable sustainability. They examine the influence of fishing to the species, their habitat, and the food web on fish species, including how fishing can affect the ecosystem and the ecosystem processes. It is particularly important to be aware when a fishery may have compromised a marine ecosystem function or might be at risk of doing so. For example, fisheries may diminish or displace biological productivity, reduce biodiversity, reduce resilience, and disrupt species relationships. So the breakthrough advances in practical approaches to EBFM have been made within the past years. And these advances include identifying ecosystem indicators that provide baseline information of important parts of the ecosystem. In addition to that, also the ecosystem structure and ecosystem function. These indicators can characterize the impact and resilience of the fish system. Practical management approaches can be based on these ecosystem indicators as they can be used in decision making. And these indicators were developed, have been developed through a recent Landfest working group and applied to fisheries in several regions, as Beth already mentioned before, which covers the Chile, the Bering Sea in the USA, India, and also the Gulf of Thailand. Next slide, please. So the main idea of this project is we want to apply the recently developed Landfest EBFM tools to improve small-scale fisheries management in Saleh Bay, West Nusa Tenggara, Indonesia, by integrating ecosystem indicators into fisheries decision-making. And from that, we would like to simulate different scenarios in the model to find the best applicable management measures to sustain fisheries resources in Saleh Bay. Next slide, please. So this slide illustrates the key steps in implementing EBFM through a science policy nexus approach, which integrate research, modeling, and policy improvements. As part of this project, we organized training and workshop for government officials, researchers, and local stakeholders to ensure effective collaboration in fisheries governance. The development of a conceptual model helps us understand how fishing pressure, environmental changes, and policy intervention affect the ecosystem. And to translate data into actionable fisheries management strategies, we developed EcoPath with EcoSim, EWE, by consulting with the stakeholders, we use this model to guide fisheries policies and management strategies, making them more effective, sustainable, and science-based. Next slide, please. So the project location, Saleh Bay, is located in West Nusa Tenggara Province, and covering an area of approximately of more than 2,000 kilometers square, and it is an important fishing ground that supports small-scale fishers and coastal communities. Next slide, please. And Saleh Bay is the home to extensive coral reef, mangrove, and seagrass ecosystem, where more than 100 fish species were identified, and most of the local community rely on fisheries for their livelihoods. However, the bay faces increasing pressure from overfishing, habitat destruction, and climate-related changes. In addition to that, one of the major challenges in managing fisheries in Saleh Bay is that the diverse fishing gears used by the fishers causes regulation and enforcement difficult. And this situation makes it an ideal location for testing the EBFM based management scenarios. Next slide, please. So to ensure that our research is directly applicable to fisheries management, we structured our study around 5 key research questions, where approach and methods used in the study aligned with specific research question. The questions are: what are the key species and ecosystem in Saleh Bay, and where are the most critical habitats for these species? What are the main threats and how we can address them? And how do local communities perceive this ecosystem? Are they willing to protect them? And what management measures or policies that should be in place to maintain the ecosystem health? Next slide, please. So the ecosystem models resulted from this study will then help us develop a flexible, customized, and multi-species fisheries management approach for Saleh Bay, which focuses on ecosystem health, optimized yield, and a balance between economic and social goals. Next slide, please. So before moving on to the methods and results, I would like to introduce the research team listed here. Each of them brings different expertise and perspective that enriches both the process and the result of the study. We have fisheries biologists, ecologists, and modelers working alongside the government and local managers to ensure that research finding can be directly applied in policy and practice. The project core team consists of the members of Rekam Nusantara Foundation, and then the Indonesian Research and Innovation Agency, or BRIN, and IPB University. And in addition to that, this core team was mentored and advised by the honorable scientists from CSIRO and the Murdoch University. So by saying that, I'll pass on my colleagues to continue with the methods and results.
Hello, I'm Intan. I will share with you the process of developing ecosystem modeling in Saleh Bay. The ecosystem model of Saleh Bay was built using EcoPet with EcoSim or EWE software. The modeling process began with the development of conceptual model, which are formulated through workshop and stakeholder meeting. We have conducted 4 workshops since November 2023 until last week. The first workshop aimed to provide an understanding of the conceptual, qualitative, and quantitative aspect of EcoPet for ecosystem fisheries modeling. And in this workshop, we also identify case species and functional group in Saleh Bay. The second workshop focused more on the technical aspect of model development and how to incorporate the result of the model into management measure as a follow-up to the first workshop. The third workshop, we finalized the EcoPet mass balance model, and the last workshop was conducted last week in Hobart. We finalized ecosystem model and analysis ecosystem indicator. We developed the structure and collect data set for an EWE model of the system so this desktop study. To develop the model, we identify case species, life stage, and functional group that play important roles in the ecosystem through field survey and literature studies. The functional group were divided based on similarity in habitat, population parameter, feeding habit, physiological behavior, ecological distribution, and body size to obtain similar species characteristic within each group. From this study, we identify 43 functional groups from detritus to whale shark. This completing basic data to input model, we collected from survey and secondary data such as underwater visual sensor survey, fish landing monitoring, literature review, government reports, and scientific database. This completing basic data to input model, we collected for the hub area, we use a proportion from each group. For the example, whale shark, dugong, ray, and large fish, we use 100%, but for small fish like shallow grouper, reef fish, we use 20% from area. For biomass, we collected data and information from data survey UVC and literature, production per biomass or P per B, and consumption per biomass or Q per B. We use information from literature. For diet composition, we conducted from laboratory analysis and literature, and data fishery we collected from socioeconomic survey or focus group discussion and the study. After the data is complete, a mass balance process is carried out to ensure that the model has met the principle of ecosystem balance. If balanced, we can continue to the EcoPath result, but if not balanced, we must adjustment our method to the data and model parameter. The result model of EcoPath provide valuable insight into the ecosystem, including energy flow, network analysis, mixed topic impact analysis, and ketone species identification. The developed EcoPath model was then extended into EcoSim, which allow the simulation of ecosystem dynamic on a temporal basis. In EcoSim simulation include variables such as time series data analysis, forcing function, and scenario modeling. EcoSim is used to evaluate various fisheries management scenario and environmental change by simulating their impact on the ecosystem. The scenario to be input in the model were developed to stakeholder meeting with the provincial government and stakeholder based on current issue and problems. For example, one of the main issue in Saleh Bay is the spear gun with compressor, and we have tried to simulate the reduction effort of spear gun with compressor. The simulation result will be presented by Pak Nasir. The final output of the model EcoPath with EcoSim include key ecological indicators such as heat map analysis to visualize ecosystem change, principal component analysis which identify key factor affecting ecosystem health, ecological topic index which assess topic structure and sustainability. Next slide, please. This detailed data method and use of EcoPath and EcoSim model, where biomass production, consumption, and diet composition data are analyzed using study reference, spatial data, and food habit sampling to develop EcoPath model for mass balance and trophic structure assessment, which catch composition, fleet, and landing data are examined over time to evaluate ecosystem resilience and management priorities using the EcoSim model. Presentation of result will continue by Pak Nasir.
Hello everyone, my name is Muhammad Nasir. I'm from the Center for Fishery, National Research and Innovation Agency of Indonesia. So basically I will present 5 group of results. The first one is ecosystem level indicator, value of catch composition, and system resilient, distortive pressure, and the last one is ecosystem trade index. Next slide, please. So the first one is the ecosystem level indicator. This is from the result of the EcoPlat and EcoSim. We try to reconstruct the catch and the productivity back to the unfished biomass. We assume that the fishery is started from 1960. So from the Ritter index, we saw that from 2009 until 2023, we see that the Ritter index is quite high, twofold of the 5.0 from the standard. So this one is a consistently up from 5, so indicate that the fishing pressure is exceeding the natural replenishment rate. So this could leading to the overfishing risk. Next slide, please. And the second one is the value of the catch composition. We try to go back through time from the original data, catch data. So this start from 2009 until 2023. So after we run the principal component analysis, so we can see there is a 3 cluster of catch composition. So we can see the first one is the 2021 until 2023 period. We can see that most of the sea cucumber and crab, catfish is on the blue. So this one is showing the shifting of the species composition. And the second group is from 2017 until 2020. And third group in the bottom is 2009, 2011. And the last one, the fourth group is 2014 until 2017. So we can see that barracuda, shark, and sweet lips is declining or remain low on the 2023. Next slide, please. And this is the continue of the value of the catch composition. So we put a 3-dimensional PCA. So we plot through time. So we can see that seaweed, small pelagic, snapper, and emperor, or the reef fish are dominating the last catch composition on 2023. So we can see that jellyfish on the dark purple is leaving and no longer become a catch composition on 2023. Next slide, please. And this is the value of the catch composition running from the simulation. So we mark some event that might affecting the catch composition also. And this is try to understand how the management and policy in Indonesia and provincial level influence the catch and system signal. There is 2 significant change on the catch record monitoring. First one is the 2014 moratorium of foreign fish vessel. This is the reduce the high value species like tuna, snapper, grouper, and also there is some government regulation that the district statistical officer are no longer collecting the data. And on 2019, pod-based catch monitoring, logbook, and VMS is established. This is improve the data collection and increase species data recorded. All the event is presented on the heat map, but it's very small and very detailed, so you can see from the presentation. Next slide, please. And the third one is the system resilient. So we use the GAO index, that's Ibu Bet already explained that we can see from 1960 until 2023 and we simulate until 2043, the index is declining, and on the 2043, we are on the partially resilient. Even with on the 2023, we also already fall on the partially resilient quadrant. So if the level of exploitation is continue, it will go down and approaching the will collapse quadrant. So this is why we need to have a management measure and try to simulate what is the possible management measure using the ecosystem simulation. Next slide, please. And this is the distortive pressure, the green band. Actually, the band is not in green in this graph. So this one is represented by the dashed line. So you can see the species group that above the green band is demersal fish or the reef fish, but we also find dugong, emperor, and subadult grouper and seabird that being structurally overfished, and therefore the management action is needed before the distortive pressure causes the structure to collapse. And tracking through time to see the response to fishing pressure, management intervention, and productivity change. Next slide, please. And this is number 5, the ecosystem trend index. So we can see through time the ETA now is fall on the light orange. So we on the low integrity and at risk, so require attention, should respond rapidly to the intervention. And currently, in the past 5 years, the ecosystem trend index is in the low integrity level that require attention and should respond rapidly to the intervention. Next slide, please. And this is the species indicator that we try to simulate. So the first one is the least resilient, the most vulnerable species. It's already likely overfished, and the target species in the catch is still inside the band, so it's optimized yield. And the most resilient or least vulnerable species is likely underfished. And the last one is the hub species. This one is for the ecologically significant. Some of them is slightly above the green band, and most of them is under the green band. Next slide, please. And this is the management queue for the simulation for the ecosystem. The first one is the topology. This is the hub species, pelagic shark, adult snapper, other reef fish, demersal fish, and small pelagic, anchovy, prawn, and zooplankton. And the resilience is the partially resilient. And from the distortive pressure, a small portion of hub species and some vulnerable species consider fishery sit above the green band. And also from the ETA, the soft possible group sit within the green band, indicating further management distortive pressure on the system. So we try to do the scenario. Next slide, please. And this is the scenario that we try with the ecosystem. This is the base model for the relative biomass. So first one is the base model. Second one is the scenario for decreasing spear gun with compressor to 0 in year 2. And this is with the assumption that they're leaving the fisheries. And the third scenario is the decreasing spear gun with compressor to 0 in year 2, and the effort move to the spear gun without compressor. So these three scenario we try to present the result on this webinar. Next slide, please. So this is the comparison between the base model, scenario number 1 and scenario number 2. We can see the GAU index is slightly changed using the scenario 1 and scenario 2, and also the total catch from the green band. Some of the species functional group is remaining on the same spot, comparing with the base model. And this is also the ETI. We can see there's a slightly differences. But on the biomass, we can see that shallow grouper, emperor, and demersal is we can see the changes on their biomass using this two scenario. Next slide, please. So science to management alignment will be presented by my colleague Irfan Yulianto.
Yeah, hello, thank you, Pak Nasir. So I would like to share how this project line with the management, fisheries management in Indonesia. As this project, we would like to promote the science management and nexus. So we did alignment with all of the management needs at the local level. We did a collaboration with the fishers, and then we have regular discussion with the provincial government and national government, and also our local partner to provide recommendation from all of our projects. So as we have a goal and so on related to the sustainable fisheries in Saleh Bay and Indonesia. So we would like to bring all of things. Next slide. So during all of this key process, we talk with our partners, we talk with the scientists from the universities in West Nusa Tenggara, we talk with researcher from BRIN, we talk with government officer as a management authority. So we consult all of things. We would like to bring all of knowledge. So we start from the beginning, zero knowledge of EBFM, and we start with the capacity building, not only for us, the team for this project, but also for government officer, for the researcher from the university, from researcher, from government, and so on. So this is how we bring this project to in line with the management needs, with the capacity needs, with all of fisheries management related, since we would like to explore the result from project to leverage at the other sites or at the national level or at the FMA level. Next slide. So as we know, and in Indonesia, fisheries resources are managed using the spatial fisheries management plan. So we have 11 fisheries management plans to manage all of Indonesian waters, and Indonesia also have fisheries management plan for targeted species or targeted species group. So we try to explore how to bring our effort from this project, our knowledge, our capacity into this Indonesian waters, as Indonesia manage using the fisheries management plan for both spatial and targeted groups. And then next slide, Kayla. And then Indonesia using tools such as license, quota, marine protected area, and ecosystem approach to fisheries management. So we think all of these tools and approach can be intervened by our knowledge that we get from the this project. So I think this is how we would like to bring all of knowledge from the local side, from the Saleh Bay into the regional FMA and a national level. And next slide, Kayla. And then back to the Saleh Bay, the provincial level, we have a long history. So all of the partners in West Nusantara starting the project for the improvement of fisheries management in West Nusantara starting in 2015 with a lot of effort, a lot of regulation, a lot of data have been collected, and then using a couple of approach, and then from this history. So you can see here starting 2015 and then now 2025 from ecosystem, from the traditional fisheries model into the ecosystem approach, and then now moving to the ecosystem base. So next. Okay. And then we expect we have the capacity and knowledge, and then the result from the Saleh Bay can be repeated to other sites, scale up to the higher level, to the provincial level, to the fisheries management level, and the national level. This is how we think science and nexus policy works in Indonesia. I think that's all from our team Indonesia. Back to you, Kayla.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to each of our speakers for putting this presentation together and sharing some of your preliminary results. At this time, I would invite everyone to come on video if you would like to help answer some questions that we received during the webinar. I'd also like to remind attendees that you can submit your questions in the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen, and I will read those out loud to the research team to answer. So our first question this person would very much like to congratulate you and the team on the insightful presentations and the work that you all are doing. And also asks, how can ecosystem-based health management strategies be effectively implemented to enhance the resilience of aquatic systems against climate change and anthropogenic pressures? This one sounds like it might be a question to start with Beth and team, and then the research team in Saleh Bay can add on with their experience as well.
Yep, thank you for that question. So a resilient ecosystem structure isn't going to 100% save you from climate change, but it'll do a lot better job than one that's already highly degraded and undermined. So rebuilding that structure or maintaining that structure right from the forage levels up through the rest of the web. We do those ecosystem indicators that you saw under climate change conditions, and it can influence their ratings. But if you've got a good internal structure, which is what these indicators are trying to show you, then you will show some resilience to climate change. You won't have as big effects. So that means making sure your habitats are protected, making sure your hub species are in a relatively undepleted state, so higher than what you might expect under single species management, so that you've got those key parts of the ecosystem have effectively buffers around them so that they can cope with that extra pressure that they're getting from climate change as well as other human uses. Is there anything that Neil or Keith wanted to add?
Yeah, I would just add, Beth, that the understanding that's developed and the indicators that you do allow simulations in the future, and this informs management and fishers and community about the likely changes that they might be facing in terms of a major impact such as climate change. And so you mentioned that it doesn't protect you from climate change, but it allows the fishers, the fishing industry and communities to adapt in time. Without these tools and looking at it in an ecosystem sense, we're not able to do that. So
yeah,
thanks.
and I'll just add that well, two things really. The first is to make sure that all of those indicators that were being talked about are looked at. But the second, to go to Irfan's point and Mohammed's point, is basically that connection between the science, the management, and the policy is really crucial. It's great to have the science in place to say here's what's needed, but if you don't have that connected through the management and the policy side, then it's not adequate to just know scientifically what's needed. You've got to actually turn that into what the policy people are prepared to support.
Thank you. Anyone from the Indonesia team that would like to chime in?
Yes, I would like to add a little bit about the aquatic living resilience in response to climate change. This is of course can be answered using through simulation and time. So also we can put the driving pressure factor on the biomass and also the catch, but we need to make sure that the data set is not acceptable, but we need to increase the level of the validity and also the quality of the data set, going to maybe like 50 years or more. That's why we try to, with the help Pak Kate and Pak Neil, we try to reconstruct what happened through time with the catch and also the production from Indonesian statistic data. So that's one of the scenario that we also might to want to try and see the impact of the climate change in Saleh Bay using the forcing factor, maybe temperature or other environmental parameters. So maybe that's my additional comment, Kayla. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. So this person would like to know if there are any similar traditions to SASI, which is a tradition to manage fishing areas, open or closing of fishing grounds. And are there any similar traditions in Saleh Bay?
Yeah, for the traditional like Asasi, I mean in Saleh Bay there is no specific tradition, but there are a couple of fishing groups. They change their fishing ground, like a rolling fishing ground, so they understand if they do fishing in the same place for every time, so they fully understand and that this is not good. So they move to another fishing ground regularly. So and then the second one in Saleh Bay, within the Saleh Bay, there are at least 2 MPAs. So this is like a zoning management system with the core zone and utilization zone inside the bay.
Thank you. I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of the questions, but I wanted to end on this last one because I think it's very well rounded and it addresses, the bigger picture of the project. But how do you think the use of EBFM can better support the nationally implemented EAFM in Indonesia, specifically in relation to the country's fishery sectors? And Irfan, I might turn that over to you and team first, and then if Beth and Keith and Neil have anything to add, you're welcome to add that as well.
Yes, I think as our experience working with Indonesian government, the Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries, we have experience to support the ministry related to the development or revising the fisheries management plan and so on. I think it will be a bit challenging. The first one related to the data set needed for this because for example for Saleh Bay we have a bit we found challenging situation for the data set. For example, when we need the historical data set with the specific species data set, this is a bit difficult, and then but it can be solved based on our discussion with the provincial government, with the researcher from the universities at the local side, talk with the community and so on. But in the national level, so this will be a bit what we call a bit. We need more effort. We need more time compared with the Saleh Bay that we did. So for example, for the ecosystem approach of fisheries at the national level, so Indonesia have developed the indicator for the EBFM, and then these tools can be used to reach the indicator that has been already used for the AIFM, because the AIFM only use the simple indicators, and then using this approach we can have better understanding for doing the using the ecosystem to be considered for the fisheries management at the, for example, at the fisheries management area level. And then, but I think as we plan to bring from the province to the FMA level, for example, so we also now trying how this can work at the ministerial level.
Thank you.
Message.
Does anyone else have things they'd like to add?
Yes, actually the AIFM framework is already implemented during the development of the fisheries management plan for each FMA. So maybe the result from the EBFM, if it bring up to the FMA level, can support the development and the revision of the fisheries management plan. At least it gives the detailed status of the fishery in the ecosystem level. So yes, it can support the fisheries management plan for a better knowledge than so it's like a transforming from single species into single species management to the ecosystem based management. So yes, it can be supporting the AIFM implementation through the revision of the fisheries management plan. Maybe that's all, Kayla.
Thank you. And Neil, I see you have your hand raised. So we'll go to you next.
Yeah, thanks, Kayla. I was just going to raise 3 points that have been made during this presentation that people don't tend to think about that much, that have all been identified as very important for assessing Asian fish stocks. Firstly, that the relationships and building trust with fishers and communities and managers at all the relevant levels is really important. And this project has over, I think it's over 7 years of history of doing that now, moving towards 10. And that's just as important as the technical skills. The second thing is, and Natsir alluded to it, is the importance of data and understanding the quality and the history of data. And so, for example, at our last workshop in Hobart, we probably spent 2 fairly full days or parts of those days, not doing technical work at all, but reviewing the history of data collection and the data sources and who held the data and what changes there had been. And that's critically important. And the third thing that it highlights is this communication. So we tend to think of ourselves communicating to researchers and scientists, but no, that to be effective, we must communicate to the policy makers, the managers, and the fishers. And again, this is something that this project is well placed to do because of its connection to the Fisheries Forum, which links all those groups together. So they're not hard technical skills, but they're critically important for translating the results from these analyses into effective policy and management and sustainable ecosystems and fisheries.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I think that's a great note to end on. So I would like to just express my greatest gratitude to all of the speakers. Thank you so much for putting together this presentation. We will be sharing the recording in a follow-up email after it is ready. And please do reach out to us at LenFest or the research team members with more questions or comments if you have them. And with that, we'll go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you again so much and have a great day, everybody.